Hey everyone, welcome to the latest episode of Board of Trade. This is episode number 23. I'm Jaipaul.
I'm Vijay.
And we are back as usual to talk about happenings and goings on in Brampton and what we think about what's happening in the world.
Sounds good. Yeah.
We've got a good agenda, I think, for today. You want to let folks know what we're going to be talking about?
Yeah, so we'll do a news segment, let's call it.
Yeah.
Just sort of a what's the latest in Brampton.
Sure.
Quick little snapshot of what's going on. I think we're going to talk about hospital funding, how that works a little bit. We'll then move into some of the news around tuition freezes being lifted and OSAP changes. I think we're interested in one of my LinkedIn posts around floor crossing. So maybe we'll talk
you had a point of view that surprised me,
Okay,
and I want to learn a little bit more.
We'll get into that. And then, of course, our usual what's a piece of media that you consumed in the last little bit that you want to share.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Sounds great. So in terms of the latest goings on in Brampton, the news that I thought would probably be the most relevant to share, just because it's been getting so much attention locally very much and definitely regionally as well, is the big investment that was announced last week at Coca-Cola Canada Bottling. And Coke Canada is investing $141 million into expanding their facility here in Brampton.
Yeah.
And I think it's noteworthy that although there were a lot of politicians at this announcement last week, this is $141 million coming from Coke. Mm-hmm. This is not from the province. This is not from the city.
Yeah.
This is them investing themselves. The current Coke facility out there, if you haven't seen it on West Creek, it's massive.
Yeah.
Have you gotten out there yet?
So I haven't.
Okay.
And my parents were surprised to know that Coke was in Brampton.
Yes.
So,
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't think many folks know that, but
they're a huge employer, thousands of employees at that facility there.
Yeah.
It's over 500,000 square feet, like it's 560.
It's massive.
It's a massive facility. I've had the tour a couple times, and I got to get you out there because you got to see it running. It's really kind of cool.
I bet.
And it's primarily a canning facility, although they do some bottling there as well. And the expansion that's going to be happening there is going to be expansion of the canning facility. So they're investing another 60,000 square feet. So for those who are familiar with the facility, I think it's happening on the east side, so like out toward Dixie. And it's going to be amazing. So they're putting in a primarily automated canning line. So it's not going to be a huge job creator in itself, but it's going to result in about 20 million additional cases of product being produced out of that facility annually. So what I was thrilled about is, although we always want to see as many new jobs as created as possible, it's going to be creating some. And those that are going to be created are going to be some high-skilled jobs, because they're going to have to be operators and maintainers of a more sophisticated beverage line.
Yeah.
But more than anything else, at a time, it was hard to sit in that announcement and not contrast the conversation happening at Coke with what we've been talking a lot about lately with Stellantis. And a company under similar pressures to find profit, who also has a supply chain that is cross-border, that is fundamentally an American company. This is a Canadian division of an American company, choosing to double down on their investment in Brampton. And some jobs will be created. That's amazing. The big takeaway for me is that this company is demonstrating a desire to stay in this community.
An American company that's expanding their facilities in Canada.
That's right. That's right.
That's
So this is the Canadian division of this massive multinational, but a multinational that's based in the U.S. and at a time right now that's not a given.
Yeah.
That those companies find their ways to stay in Canada.
I completely agree. Is it fair to say that if you are drinking a can of Coke anywhere in Southern Ontario, there's a good chance it's from Brampton?
If you're drinking a can of Coke, as far as I understand, pretty much anywhere east of Manitoba into Quebec, it was produced in Brampton.
That's awesome.
It's the largest beverage facility. I believe they have 9 beverage facilities in Canada as a whole.
Yeah.
This is by far the largest, and services, everything in Ontario. I think there's only one product, and I can't remember what it is, but it's not it's not one of those top of mind conventional sodas. It's like a Dasani water or one of their sports drinks or something like that.
Right.
But if you're drinking anything that's a conventional carbonated, like what you associate with Coke, it came out of Brampton.
Yes.
And the team there is amazing. And what I love about that team is they are very committed to the community as well. So they're big supporters of JA, so formerly Junior Achievers, trying to create pathways for individuals who are looking to explore jobs in skilled trades. They're big supporters of Big Brothers Big Sisters. They do lots for youth in our community. They support a lot of initiatives around women in skilled trades. So it's just a lot of good news stories in my mind that come out of Coke. and I'm really happy that they're getting some well-deserved recognition for this investment, because this is not nothing. This is huge. The premier came out to be part of the announcement. What was interesting, I thought, as well, was the president of Unifor Canada came out and spoke at the announcement. So really talking about this not just being a good investment on behalf of the company, but recognizing this is like a great investment on behalf of the people.
So these are Unifor jobs.
These are Unifor jobs.
Oh, wow.
Not everything there is. I can't remember the exact ratio. It was shared with me last year because they went through a collective bargaining agreement.
Okay.
I want to say, don't quote me on this, it's somewhere in that 70 to 80% of their workforce on the floor is Unifor. But awesome. It's not entirely unionized, but a good chunk of the plant is. And Unifor came out to show support for this announcement and support for Coke. So it was really a great news piece for Brampton, and just a big thank you to Coke.
Yeah, yay for Coke.
Thank you for Coke.
Okay, second big news item, not really this week, past month, 3 weeks at least, is that on February 6th, which was the date of our last podcast, the municipal budget was passed with a 1% increase on property taxes. If you remember, we were responding to a proposed budget that proposed a 1.5% increase as a result of a cost-saving directive to staff to find, I believe, just over $4 million in savings this calendar year, as well as a 1% increase in the hospital levy, which will, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but this hospital levy is going directly towards fulfilling a $125 commitment to William Osler for the second hospital.
And if I can just pause there for a second, I don't know if I misheard you or I misunderstood. You said there's a 1% increase in the hospital levy, or was it's a 1% hospital levy?
No, it's a 1% increase.
Increase on okay, so I want to make sure I heard that correctly. Okay, perfect.
A 1% increase in the hospital levy. It's going to be paid to William Osler.
That's right.
And we have that $125 million commitment.
That's right.
Once that is fulfilled, this levy will be paying back a loan that we're taking from our strategic reserves.
That's right.
To stabilize operations. So the council is characterizing this as a 0% increase, notwithstanding a 1% increase in the hospital levy.
And they really, in the narrative around this, when they made the announcement, I think the mayor was very clear to say this is on the city's portion, which I appreciate, because we had shared some commentary earlier that we felt that a better job needed to be done to communicate what percentage increases were related to the city versus the regional portion of our tax bill, because there is going to be an increase on our tax bill well beyond 1% for those of us who pay property taxes.
About 3.31%.
That's right.
When you account for the region's portion.
That's right.
Yeah. So that's the news there.
Yeah.
And well, let's move into the first issue.
I think that's great. No, I think it was great. And I will say one other additional point on that is, I thought it was interesting that the in the budget announcements on the day of that we went on the Friday to hear the official announcement of the 0% notwithstanding the hospital levy, that the mayor went to great lengths, and also in the press conference that I attended after the fact, to share that this was a byproduct of feedback that they had received through stakeholder engagement. And I think, to me, this is a very important takeaway from this story, because ultimately we do not shape the budget. We do not get to have input on the numbers, but we provide commentary. And we were one of many voices out there sharing that we felt that the budget needed to be more reflective of the financial situation that residents and businesses found themselves in. And so to hear that at the end of this process of stakeholder engagement, that the city felt that they had to sharpen their pencils and find that $4 million savings to bring the budget down even more closely in line with to that 0%, I think is a victory for process. The process that we're engaged in, and hats off to the residents who took the time to get on those virtual town halls or attend those coffee chats with their local councillors, or who sent feedback through organizations like ours to make sure voices were heard. Because I'll take it at face value that was in fact the case, and if it was in fact the case that enough of us made noise, and council and the mayor had to respond to that, and that resulted in a change that there's going to be some long-term ramifications for sure. These amounts have to be covered somewhere, but in the short term provides the relief that us as taxpayers need, then that's a victory for the democratic process of input and feedback. So I'm really happy to hear that that's what happened, because that's quite frankly what we've been advocating for all along. was more opportunity for voices to be heard.
Yeah, that's ultimately what our commentary was.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, I want to reiterate this point that I'm very excited for next year's budget.
Yeah.
Because we have secured a few different commitments from the budget team and council. They are working on a methodology for commercial and industrial tax bills.
Yeah.
So we'll see those tax bill assessments in next year's budget and a more robust consultation period. Again, the mayor did emphasize the extensive consultation that was considered in this updated figure of 1%, and that's a win for local democracy.
I think so. I will also put on, I think it's also worth noting, I think you're probably the only person, including the budget team, who has clearly worked to the bone, who is going to say, I'm excited for next year's budget process.
Fair, yes. Good point.
We wanted to talk about some other issues then.
Yeah.
So the first one we wanted to tackle is the notion actually of this 1%.
Yes.
And one of the things I've appreciated is that we've gotten positive feedback on this podcast when people tell us that we take the time to explain not just what's happening, but how these things happen and how things come together.
I'll also just pause there for a moment. I just had a briefing with Narrative Research on the BCI, and this was an insight that was gleaned from some of our surveying.
Okay.
That people really look to us for information about municipal affairs specifically.
Excellent.
So we are a trusted source, so to speak.
You want to share what the BCI is?
So the BCI is our Business Confidence Index survey. It's a annual survey that we do. We send out to the business community to understand what the needs are in the community and what are the issues facing Brampton businesses.
Exactly. So much more appreciated. All the more reason that we take the time to do things like this. So we thought, it might be worth taking a moment to explain this, the levy around the hospital, and what it is that the city of Brampton pays for, and why we as taxpayers have to contribute to our local health care. And so do you want to, we actually wouldn't talk about who's going to talk about what, but do you want to talk about the local share and how that works?
Yeah, and feel free to fill in gaps. So in Ontario, we operate within what's called a local share policy when it comes to hospital funding. So the province, the Ministry of Health, provides 90% of the construction funding for the construction of new hospitals. So the actual building of the hospital itself. The remaining portion, so that 10%, the remaining 10% of the construction costs are borne by the hospital system itself. 100% of the non-eligible costs, so all of the bedding and the furniture and
everything equipment wise, everything other than salaries, basically.
Exactly. That is also provided by the hospital itself.
That's right.
So the 10% and that 100%, that's what's referred to as the local share.
That's right.
Anything you want to?
No, and I was just going to say, so that 10%, typically when people look at the numbers, is actually closer to 25 to 30%. Therefore, because it's the 10% on the construction cost, but the 100%
that's right.
on the furnishing cost. So when the ribbon is cut on the hospital opening, the local share portion is typically closer to 25 to 30%. Is what most analyses post-hospital openings will tell us. So we're really responsible for almost a third, or at least a quarter to a third of the cost of this new expansion of Peel Memorial from an urgent care center into a hospital.
And in Brampton, like other municipalities, the actual municipality itself kicks in some portion of that local share as well. So I believe it's a 50-50 split for the second hospital. Originally, I think it was estimated to be around 87 million. Now that's increased to 125 as we
you nailed it. The price they've pegged on the expansion of the hospital is 2.3 billion. Therefore tumbling out to about 250 million is the local share. The hospital network or through the foundation is responsible for 125. The city of Brampton is responsible for 125.
That's right. So this comes from a combination of the actual property tax levy that we referred to, hospital levy, but also this comes from philanthropic foundations, donors, and as you might notice in Brampton, we have a Hockey Night in Brampton, a few others. I believe the Holy Gala as well. These are fundraising opportunities for that local share.
And those are going to be clear toward the hospital portion of the share. If you attend the Holy Gala, if you contributed like the $14 million that was raised at the mayor's hockey tournament, those are funds that are going to the hospital foundation. That's their 125. We as taxpayers and ratepayers are still responsible for our 125, which is the 1% that you're going to see on your tax bill.
Now let me ask you this: what do you think about local share?
I mean, I understand the notion behind having to ensure that there is local commitment
Yeah.
to the hospital, that there is skin in the game, so to speak,
Yeah.
to ensure that the municipality is incentivized to work alongside the province in ways that are constructive.
Yes.
Because when it comes to construction, for instance, the municipality has levers they can pull in the form of land allotment, in the form of permitting, in the form of zoning, that can facilitate the hospital being built in an expedient and cost-effective way. And so incentivizing the cities to manage those elements well through some contribution toward local share of the construction cost,
Yeah.
in my mind, makes some sense.
Yes.
The notion, however, of paying for the furnishings and equipment within the hospital, I have never been able to wrap my head around
Yeah.
why that becomes a municipal responsibility.
Yeah.
And even at 10%, I think there's some room for conversation to say
Yeah.
how much needs to be borne by the municipality to attain what I'm describing, that sense of buy-in and commitment to working toward a successful and quick project. I think it could probably be less than 10%.
Yeah.
But let's just park that for a moment. Let's assume 10% is reasonable, because I think it's reasonable to say the municipality has to contribute something for the reasons I described. But the contribution toward the fixtures, the desks, the computers, the phones, the MRI machines,
Yeah.
the operating theaters, I have never been able to wrap my head around why that's the case. And I think that opinion's been shared by others. I think like AMO and others have pushed back and said, hey, look, like, why are we putting this burden on municipalities? Because quite frankly, this becomes an impediment
Yeah.
to healthcare being rolled out
Yeah.
at the level that we need. Like, why don't we have enough emergency rooms in Brampton? Well, part of it's because we are unable to fundraise at the level that we need to without putting a huge burden on our local taxpayer.
Yes.
In order to facilitate those hospitals being built. At a time that healthcare, you can make an argument, especially for hospitals. We're not talking about local doctors' offices. These are regional resources. It's not as though the Brampton Civic or Peel Memorial only serves those in Brampton. It serves a regional audience. Whether we're talking into Caledon or out to Halton Hills, it is a provincial responsibility at the end of the day, the delivery of healthcare. How do you feel?
I completely agree with you. I don't have, certainly you won't find any contradiction from me on that, but I think there's also an element of fairness too.
Yeah.
You know, if Hamilton's looking for their funding for their 7th hospital or 8, however many hospitals they're at now, that's one conversation. Brampton is severely below the provincial average in terms of beds per resident. And you could make the argument that the local share component maybe can be reconsidered when you have a massively growing urban center that only has one functioning hospital.
Fair.
Right. So I think there's room for reassessment.
Yeah.
I agree. I think the commitment to sort of that local expertise is important. The risk sharing nature of local share and ultimately that project discipline of ensuring that a project is financially viable before there's provincial commitment. I think those are all important things, but we are in a healthcare emergency in Brampton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other piece I'll add in there too, just as I'm thinking out loud now as well, is we talked about the ways that portion is made up, right? So local share comes about through things like tax levies and pulling from reserves, drawing from reserves or special projects like that. There are designations within our reserves for special projects. It comes through funds raised through the hospital foundations and all the ways in which they do that through donation and so forth. But it's also, when you talk about how the average individual interacts with the hospital network, this is why your parking costs crazy amounts at the hospital, as a for instance as well.
That's fair.
Is some of that $125 million is going to be recovered through things like retail within the hospital itself. So, and that's fine. That's fair if the Tim Hortons folks or whatever want to, have a kiosk in there. But when you talk about, accessibility to healthcare, that's why parking is so expensive. That's why, being able to just get onto the hospital grounds themselves is difficult, is because we have to recover those funds somewhere, somehow. And so, someone goes into the hospital for an emergency and is parked out there for a couple of days or whatever the case may be because a loved one's in the hospital. That pain that people talk about all the time, that's a direct byproduct of this funding formula. Because they've pushed that burden onto the hospital to say, it's your responsibility to raise this money and maintain this money for the operation of the hospital itself, like paying back that loan. It's got to come from somewhere, right? And so these are the parts I really struggle with. I also think there's a role, quite frankly, for the federal government, therefore, to play a bigger role. Like right now, we've only talked about the province and the municipality,
Yeah.
and healthcare is a provincial jurisdiction. There is the Canada Health Transfer, I think
Yes.
it's called. That's the mechanism through which the federal government, provides funds to the provinces for the allocation, or sort of for the building of resources like this. So in as much as we can talk about the provincial level, this is the opportunity to talk about the federal part of it, right? The feds love to wash their hands of healthcare and say it's a provincial issue, but reality is that if we wanted to be loud about this issue around where the funding comes from, this is our opportunity not just to advocate at the provincial level, but to actually make this a federal conversation. Therefore, to say, look, if the federal government were prepared to drive more money down to the provincial level or allocates a certain amount of the health transfer toward operating costs of the hospital, we might be able to relieve the burden on the municipal local share component.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, this is ultimately how we got universal health care, is through the creativity of the federal government being able to utilize the power of the public purse to ensure uniformity and some harmonization across healthcare policy between the provinces. So I completely agree. I don't buy all the sort of federalist arguments around healthcare and other things. But before we move on from this topic, I tried to do some research. What's the status of the Cancer Care Center at Brampton Civic?
As far as I'm aware, there is no status that I know of.
Yes.
So don't take this as fact.
Yeah.
But I'm only inferring from the advocacy efforts that I've seen out there. So we are able to, as a for instance, among the opportunities we have to engage with the provincial government on matters related to budget are the deputations that we do as part of their budget outreach, a couple months ago, or last month rather. And so I was able not just to do our own deputation to Minister Bethlen Falvey's team regarding what we're looking for businesses in Brampton, but I was able to listen to what the team from Osler had in their presentation as well, because they preceded me as part of the delegation.
Okay.
And in their delegation, it was noted that they were seeking the funding and support for that cancer care center. So that's been something that's been talked about for a number of years now. For those who aren't familiar, there is a desire to build in Brampton a regional cancer care center that would serve not just Brampton, but as I spoke to before, into Halton Hills, into Caledon, and even further north, because there is no such resource, as far as I'm aware, outside of Toronto, unless we get into Northern Ontario. So there's that big swath of like Northern GTA into Northern Ontario that's underserved. So this would be a regional cancer care center built here in Brampton as part of the Osler network. And but where that's at, I do not know beyond. I'm seeing the folks at Osler still advocating for funding to be set aside for that. Now, my understanding is that there's some tough decisions that are going to have to be made around sequencing for asks in Brampton. So right now we have Brampton Civic, obviously, Peel Memorial, which is designated an urgent care center. And the difference between that being a hospital and urgent care is that for those who utilize those services, you'll know that Brampton Civic, the emergency room is open 24/7, and if you are deemed necessary, you can be admitted for overnight stay at Brampton Civic. Whereas at Peel Memorial, the urgent care center is not open 24 hours. I think it closes at 10, if I'm not mistaken, and you can't have an overnight stay at Peel Memorial. So this investment in Peel Memorial, what we're talking about is not, there are going to be some new buildings and so forth built as part of this, but really the service expansion will include the 24/7 emergency and the opportunity to have individuals checked into the hospital for overnight stay. You can make the argument that even with the additional 250 beds we're talking about as part of that expansion, we are still below, not an argument needs to be made, the math bears out, we are still well below the provincial average. And a third hospital for Brampton is justifiable. So the question now becomes one of the various things that Brampton is advocating for to the province, where in the sequencing is a third hospital versus that cancer care center? And I don't know what the strategy is at Osler or at the city regarding that, but I do believe that that's part of the equation as well, as to how hard we're chasing one versus the other.
Well, thanks for
I don't know if you've heard anything there.
No, I haven't. I'm curious about all of this, and there are a lot of healthcare asks in Brampton, but because we need it, frankly. So.
And I think increasingly, it's not just our population. I think there has to be a regional lens applied to how we think about healthcare. I think one of the part of my insight here is because I used to work in healthcare. We had an approach to healthcare under previous provincial governments through the LHINs, the Local Health Integration Network, that took an approach. I'm not saying this was a perfect mechanism, but they had built out a structure that allowed for local voice to be at the table, to ensure that provincial dollars were allocated in the best manner to meet the needs of local population. And that approach, the L in local, meant regional. So the LHIN that was based in Brampton, which is where actually the offices that BOW currently occupy, had a lens that took into account a much larger swath of Peel region, heading into places like Shelburne and Orangeville and so forth, to figure out how we balanced out health resources in that manner. And I felt that was a great approach to take, because the recognition is that one's healthcare doesn't stop at the municipal border.
That's right.
In the same way we talk about business issues, they don't stop at the municipal border. So having a lens that says, across a much larger component of the province, how should we be best allocating resources? Where can we best place resources for people to access? Is the right approach. It shouldn't be Brampton versus Mississauga versus Oakville. It should be, what is this larger swath of population, 250,000 people in this area of the province need, and how do we put the right resources in place? And if those resources are best suited in Brampton because we have certain infrastructure here, great. If an argument's to be made to have them elsewhere, so be it. But I think that lens of a regional piece that goes beyond just the city border is important, which is all the more reason why I have struggled with these things like local share contributions, and why municipalities are fighting with one another for the investment from the province for these services. We have to have a lens that thinks bigger, in my mind.
Well said. I completely agree. All right, is this a good time to move on to post-secondary?
I think so. I think I've talked my way out. Talked myself out on healthcare.
That's great.
So post-secondary is an interesting one.
Yeah.
This is so we had an announcement from the province 2 weeks ago now.
Yes.
A week and a half.
I think so. Yeah.
A few days ago. And this was an interesting one, and I'm talking only because I want to sit up because I really want to hear your point of view on this. And so there's been a significant issue for us in the past year and a half. That we've really been dealing with, but the sector has been dealing with historically for some time, is the tuition freeze. And so post-secondary institutions in in Ontario, have been struggling in part because they have not had the ability to increase tuition beyond, I think it's only 5% per year on domestic students, which basically is a funding formula that goes back to the 1990s. And this has been done in the spirit of making sure that post-secondary education was accessible to families in Ontario, to young people in Ontario, to students in Ontario. And so possibly a positive way of looking at it, but if you're not increasing the ways in which universities and colleges can bring in revenue, then you're not allowing these universities and colleges to be competitive institutions. And by that, what I mean is that they're not able to invest in the infrastructure that they need. They're not able to keep buildings up to modern standards. As technologies and sectors in which their faculties are improving and increasing and changing over time, they're not able to bring in, whether it be computers, whether it be CAD machines, particularly when we talk about like skilled trades. How does the Sheridan College, pay for all the millions and millions of dollars of trade equipment that they have to have if they can't bring in if they can't raise revenues, let alone keep pace with the salaries for faculty and staff and so forth. So they've really hampered the school's ability to be competitive when they've said, look, we're basically capping your revenue, but all your expenses are going up and up and up all the time, which is really what led to the whole crisis that we had with international students. Because that's what really put schools in a position where they said, well, look, if we can't increase tuition for domestics, then the only place we can find new revenue is by going after international students, trying to draw more of those into the country, because there wasn't a tuition cap. I know it's a long-winded way, but I think it's important context for where we're going, right? Which is why the decisions made last year by the federal government to limit the amount of international students across the country, but in an outsized way impacting Ontario, were so devastating to schools in our communities. Because suddenly we, without any warning, without any consultation to either the schools who were impacted directly by the loss of revenue, or industry who was impacted by the loss of pool of talent, both in the short term and potentially long term, we said, look, we're not going to have these international students in the country nearly to the level that we once did. And now suddenly schools are left without the revenue resources that they needed. So you already said we can't make any more money on domestics, and we're now going to limit the amount of internationals you can bring in. And suddenly we saw in the news over the past year, Seneca College closing a campus, Sheridan College, closing programs, George Brown closing programs, Trios, closing a number of their, public and private both, right? Yeah. So the college sector was hit particularly hard. Yeah. The university sector was also hit, quite significantly. And we saw reductions. We're seeing layoffs. We're seeing reductions in programming that will have a long-term effect on the types of individuals we're putting into the workforce. Yeah. So this is where we found ourselves. So a real crisis beyond just the usual, are we training the right people?
Yeah.
These schools were in a business model that was purely unsustainable.
Yes.
So a lot of effort was made over the past year from the post-secondary sector and organizations like ours, the Boards of Trade, Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and others to say, look, what we need to do is we need to expand what was referred to as corridor funding. And corridor funding basically is the way of saying the province has to be ready to chip in more money to support the school's ability to sustain. So for every domestic student that attends a school in Ontario, the province kicks in a certain amount. That amount has not changed since the 1990s. Yes. And that we also have to have the ability to increase tuition beyond that 5% per year. Again, recognizing that students can only absorb so much, but there has to be more than a freeze to allow them to find new sources of revenue if they can no longer rely on international students. Mm-hmm. So last week, the province finally made an announcement to say, we're addressing this issue. Mm-hmm. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you now to say, okay, so what did we get out of that? Because that was quite interesting what their announcement was.
Yes. So on February 12th, the province announced $6.4 billion of new funding over 4 years to address this issue. Again, the details of which we've yet to find out.
Yeah.
But we await with bated breath about that. And in addition to that, they've lifted the tuition freeze that was in place. So schools can now raise tuition 2% annually or the rate of inflation, whichever is lower. And this is interesting because it also accompanied announcements around changes to OSAP.
Yeah.
And so this is a bit tangled, but essentially the state of affairs going into just a couple of weeks ago was, and I took advantage of this, up to about 85% of a student's financial aid from the province was grants, right? No non-repayable grants. That has changed now to a maximum of 25% of provincial aid being non-repayable. A minimum of 75% of financial aid has to be loans. So this is money that has to be paid back.
Yeah.
This is a massive shift, as I mentioned, 85 to 25%, massive change in the access to grants. And as a result of this, there are folks, the Ontario NDP, as an example, launched their Save OSAP campaign. The opposition has been very vocal about this. Student groups, USA, a few others have mentioned that this is going to have deleterious consequences on the ability of in particular low-income Ontarians to be able to access post-secondary education. As a response to this, the Premier mentioned that it's important that students consider areas of study that align with industry needs. And the term that he used is you can't select basket weaving courses. That you have to think about jobs of the future. And so I mean I don't know if I want to get into my take just yet, but what I will say is what I'm noticing is a shift in how we think about education.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about your perspective on this, but under Kathleen Wynne, one of the last policies of her government was reforming OSAP, consolidating the grants and the tax credits which disproportionately favored higher income Ontario families. Yeah. She consolidated that into a series of grants that allowed lower income Ontarians to be able to access post-secondary without any provincial debt at all.
Yeah.
And also allows for greater access to post-secondary education for the average Ontarian. And admittedly, I took advantage of this. A majority of my funding was grants, not just me, but a number of folks in my cohort and people around my age. But the reason I bring this up is it's clear that the Wynne government viewed education as a tool for social equity.
That's right.
So OSAP utilization went up significantly, but there's data that suggests that a number of students who wouldn't have otherwise considered post-secondary education now considered it because it became financially accessible. This was a priority of that government. Now, under Ford's leadership, it's clear that post-secondary is about two things: cost containment, that this is a massive line item in the provincial budget, and this needs to be controlled. So hence the lifting of the tuition freeze, and changes to OSAP, so converting to loan structure, which means that this shrinks the actual line item for the province, but it places the burden now on students themselves.
That's right.
The second piece that I see from the Ford government is school is a means to employment, and that might sound intuitive, but that being said, I mean, he made the comment about basket weavers, and I'm curious about your perspective. For me, I think part of the reason why government is involved in post-secondary is because knowledge for knowledge's sake is an important part of civilization, right? Like this is an important piece. It's important that we fund research and fundamental R&D in areas of study that might not necessarily be commercializable, right? And so this shift, in my mind, signals that education is only for employment, and that this is a line item in the budget that has run out of control. I'm interested in your perspective on this.
You know, in the main, I'm quite, again, we're very aligned on this. The only thing I'd push back on is just in terms of how the story is being told. You described it as a reduction of grants from 85% down to 25%. And I would actually encourage the thinking to be, the phrasing to be the other way around, that the repayable has moved from 15% to 75%.
Yeah, fair enough.
Because that's ultimately, I think, what people need to be hearing.
Yeah.
Right? It's not the reduction, it's the increase in burden. But in terms of the impact, no, I very much agree with you. And we are making education increasingly inaccessible to individuals in our province. And that's just fundamentally a problem that we need to be addressing. And in the manner that you're describing it, this piece here around you're trying to find that alignment. So I'm sympathetic to where the schools are. We had to find a mechanism. So all the pieces around being able to free up tuition increases and so forth, and find ways to create more sustainable core funding for the schools. I'm in support of that. I think there's going to be a lot of detail work that we need to understand. And we know that our colleagues at the various schools are still receiving their technical briefings from the province on exactly how they're going to be able to access this. And I know from our initial engagements with a few who've received their technical briefings, they're none too happy either. So I suspect this is probably our next podcast. We'll have a lot more information about, is this actually even working for the schools? We'll find that part out. So I just want to make sure we're not forgetting that part of the story for those who are listening. We're just parking that because a lot of details are still emerging on how that works, but not every school is super happy about this. But we understand that somewhere in there, addressing core funding is important. But I don't understand why the province chose this moment to make the reforms to OSAP, unless it's the reasons you're describing. It's just a line item to them on a budget that needed to be addressed. And if that's how we're thinking about education, then we're post-secondary education, then we're missing the whole point of what education is for, in my mind. The premier's comments there around the basket weaving thing, I don't know if you saw it as well, but there was an individual, he's like an entrepreneur from First Nations community, and he's a basket weaver, and apparently makes a very good living weaving baskets in the traditional manner, and slapped back at the premier in that way, saying, basket weaving's an honorable tradition, and I make a good living doing it. Thank you very much, which I loved. I'll share that with you. Okay. But the other piece he made in those same comments too is this is. And it's the way the province operates, right? It's this, we saw a similar approach when it came to the speed cameras. We saw similar approaches when it came to bike lanes. We saw it with rent increases. Some bad apple anecdotal outlier becomes the narrative that the premier jumps onto. And he's like, I've been hearing, some kids are getting this OSAP and they're using it to buy expensive watches and cologne or something to that effect. And this is why we have to tighten up controls on OSAP. And if that's how you're making your decisions on how to create the talent pool for the jobs, if that's in fact your desire. But to your point, I'm much more in the main, even if you accept that that's the premise, but I agree with you, it has nothing to do with that. It's to have an educated, engaged society in the future. To if this is how you're making your decisions, well, someone told me once that a kid bought a fancy watch with his OSAP. Well, then what are we doing here? Yeah. This is, you're missing the entire point. And the I agree with you that the purpose of education is to create opportunities for people to become thinkers, to be able to understand how to explore their creativity, and to find opportunities to apply themselves in ways that are fulfilling.
Yeah.
And if some of that takes form of making a living for themselves or creating economic opportunities for others, then that's a great outcome.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's the reason you do it. Mm-hmm. And you cited your own example of having cited OSAP as like your connection to this. Similarly, I used OSAP when I was a student, but I also am one of those individuals for whom my career path does not reflect my degree in any form or fashion. Yeah. But I can tell you without any hesitation that I apply the experiences I had of being a student and the things I learned in those classrooms every single day. Yes. And I would not be able to do what I do now in well beyond just my professional application, like in my role as a member of my society, as a parent, without having gone to university. It plays a fundamental role in who I am. But what I have on paper has nothing to do with what it is I do for a living. Yeah. And again, I don't want to fall trap to outside outliers going on anecdotes, but to me, I believe that is the story here. And there are only so many, because what else are we saying? Everyone's just going to go and become an engineer or a doctor or a nurse. Great professions, but we can't have everyone chasing those particular degrees as the only option that's available to them. So to suggest that we're now going to price out everyone else from going there because they can't see the direct payback ROI on their university education within a certain time period, I think is just shortchanging the long-term opportunity that's going to be created in this province.
I completely agree with you, and there's an economic development angle to this too.
Absolutely,
education is a long game, but our comparative advantage in Canada was how educated. Two things: immigration and how educated our population was.
It's funny, and you say that second thing. Yeah. It's among the things when we hear our the premier's counterparts at the federal level, that is among the things that are talked about all the time.
Yes.
Why will Canada have the opportunity to be competitive in the world? The Prime Minister will tell you it's because we were one of the most educated countries in the world.
Yes.
Full stop.
Yes. I will say, I agree that post-secondary institutions have struggled, and I am sympathetic to the fact that there are vanishingly fewer resources available to them, from a revenue generation standpoint. I will also say it is also true that administrations for these universities
have bloated.
It's Baumel's cost disease. They've exploded and seems to be exploding infinitely. Our friend Jonathan English, he often brings up this point. He went to school in Columbia in New York, and he said, Columbia has a massive endowment, billions of dollars, and in like the last 30, 40 years, they've put up one building. Yeah. You go to Waterloo, my alma mater. Yeah. I did my undergrad there. They've put up like 6 buildings in the last 10 years. Yeah. It's quite unique what we have in Canada. Yeah. That being said, there is policy that could address those specific challenges.
And that's where ultimately I would want to take this conversation is if these are your concerns. Yeah. Who qualifies, how those dollars are spent, how the institutions spend the dollars that they receive. Have those discussions. Yeah. And that's what I trust is happening with these technical briefings and so forth, that we'll have further commentary down the road. But to say that the burden of your education is entirely upon the families of these students, I think we're just not understanding where we're going. At a time in particular, it just seems so tone deaf to me that at a time that the number one issue in this country is affordability. Yes. That this is the time that they'd say, by the way, we're going to make it even harder for young people to access post-secondary education. Yeah. Makes no sense. It just speaks to a complete disconnect as to where people are in this province.
Completely agree. Young people and people who are looking to upskill and reskill and do continuing education as well. And I completely agree. And we just had this tech event.
I was just going to talk to this. Yeah. You go. And because I think you're going to say the same thing.
Well, I was just going to say, a software developer, they've seen a lot of disruption in their industry because of AI, right? What do we hear from experts in the field? They say that the demand for these sorts of kind of humanities based knowledge,
creativity,
knowledge fields and,
Yeah.
and industries and that expertise is going to grow even more than we've seen in the last few years. The idea that operationalizing AI with a human touch means that you might not necessarily need to understand the intricacies of code and be a coder yourself, but you should be able to address bias and understand the need for care and employ creativity, to your point. So these sorts of skills will only grow in demand.
No, absolutely. I want to make the connection to the event that we had last week as well. So this was our Tech Forward symposium around AI, cybersecurity, and immersive reality. And a bunch of great stuff that came out of that. But among two things that connect directly to this conversation in my mind, one is what you're describing. For me, the takeaway clearly, and this is not you or I, this is technologists and thought leaders in the field. They're not saying we need more coders and software development. No. If anything, they're saying we need more people. I can't pronounce the word properly, but people, ethicists.
Yeah.
But we need people who can bring an ethical lens and a creative lens and a human lens. Yeah. We need people who, we don't need more people learning computer science.
We need more people figuring out.
They're the first ones to tell you that at the stage. Yes. But the other piece that was a clear takeaway for me, and it comes back to this short-sightedness I see from the premier. Yet again, and again, the piece that infuriates me the most is all this is happening at a time that affordability is the biggest issue that families are facing. But one of the takeaways from an event around technology, the very thing that I suspect he would tell you to take as the alternative to basket weaving, is the folks at the front of that room will tell you, we have no idea what the job's going to look like in a year, 5 years, 10 years. Like the further out we go, the less certainty we have. So those individuals who are in high school now or just entering post-secondary now, 4 years from now when they graduate, the jobs that they will be applying to, the jobs they'll be looking for, the jobs that will be available to them are murky at best, because the nature of technology and the nature of work is changing so rapidly. So we will always have need for certain skilled trades and so forth and healthcare, absolutely. But the manner in which they're being done is changing so rapidly. To say at this point you need to know today as a 17-year-old what it is that you're going to be doing for the rest of your life and make that investment wisely, it just is an impossible decision to ask of someone. In fact, what you're going to end up doing is seeing a bunch of kids probably taking gap years and so forth, trying to as they wait it out. But what we really need to be saying is like, no, go get an education, go learn, go understand as many things as you can. And let's figure out, how we integrate you into the workforce, because we should be doing really is trying to strengthen the connection. If this is what the premier's motivation is, we should be finding every way to incentivize industry to be working more closely with post-secondary institutions. To say, okay, what are those off-ramps and on-ramps looking like? How do we create more work-integrated learning opportunities? How do we find ways to create more co-op programs? How do we get more mentors into the classroom? How do we support entrepreneurship? If this is really their ambition, there are lots of ways to get there that quite frankly don't even cost nearly as much money. But to say, no, we're going to run everything as usual, cut the amount of money that we're giving students and let everything else just kind of figure its way out is just an abdication of responsibility in my mind. Nothing short of that.
Completely agree. Completely agree. Okay, our last issue. Shall we get into that?
Yeah, let's do it. Well, it was more a question I had for you.
Okay.
So we've seen, so we talked a lot about local stuff and the impacts and things, but this is a sort of a broader political issue that I've been wanting to ask your point of view on. And I have a whiteboard in my office where I scribble down ideas for the podcast. And this was on it. And then I saw that, I think it was on Friday, you had actually posted something on this topic, which was the complete, and took a point of view that was opposite what I expected you to take. So I was first interested in this idea, and then you actually took it up a notch by surprising me. But what I wanted to talk about was floor crossings. And we've seen over the past several months, a number of floor crossings from the Conservative Party to the Liberal Party federally. And as you know, the Carney government continues to flirt with a majority. It seems like every time they get there, something happens. Most recently, they've had a couple of appointments. Bill Blair, Chrystia Freeland, leaving the party. So they're not ebbing the other way. They've moved on to other things that create more vacancies. But it seems every couple of weeks we get a little bit closer to that Liberal majority. I think they're 3 away now. They have 2 by-elections coming. They're probably going to win. Sorry, 3 by-elections coming, 2 of which they're probably going to win. So they're very close to getting there through the electoral process. But what's kept them in this spitting distance of the majority has been Conservatives defecting over to the Liberal Party. And I'm curious what you thought about that.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, what I assumed you were going to say was that this is actually an undermining of the democratic process. Because presumably one is elected to represent their constituency around a set of issues while representing a particular political party. And to midstream, and in fact, in this case, not even midstream, many of these MPs have served, less than a year at this point in time, to say, I'm leaving that party to cross the aisle to support the other party to help them form a more strong government, when the mandate of the people was to elect a minority government with the theoretical checks and balances that come along with that. Sort of does 2 things then. It sort of defies, one can make the argument, the will of their local constituency, and it kind of flies in the face of nationally what had been aspired to. Not that we all get together and have a conversation about do we want a majority or minority, but this is how the democratic process played out. So I was curious your point of view, because I assumed you would see it the way I saw it, which was this actually, we have to find ways to temper this, whether it be through cooling off periods or other mechanisms to discourage floor crossings. Perhaps if you want to leave your party, serve as an independent and wait till your next election to declare your allegiance to another color sign. But you came out and said you actually felt that this was democracy in its best form of action. So explain yourself, not because I think you're wrong, just because you surprised me.
What I'll start by saying is I don't think every instance of floor crossing is equal.
Fair.
Right? There are some that are going to be more opportunistic than others. And what I'll say as well is I don't necessarily know that floor crossing is the best expression of democracy, but I do think it's a healthy and legitimate part of democracy. And the reason, so in addition to all of the by-elections you mentioned, I also want to mention one other. In Scarborough Southwest, which Bill Blair occupied, the federal Liberals, the Liberal government, was able to poach Dolly Begum from the Ontario NDP, who was the deputy leader, and which is wild. So it's not technically a floor crossing, but it is. It's moving to another level of government but changing party stripe.
And that one I think a little bit. I'm less concerned about because there is going to be a by-election there, and I think saying if someone's moving up from provincial to federal, provincial, that doesn't seem quite the same to me. But I hear what you're saying. That is another variation though of people changing midstream.
And then the other piece of this is Nathaniel Erskine Smith is going to run in the provincial by-election for Scarborough Southwest, which means that there will be a federal by-election for Beaches East York. So they also have to win Beaches as well, which they probably will. But anyway, I digress. So what I'll say is this. Canada has a strict culture of party discipline, the strictest among all Westminster parliamentary systems. If you look at the UK or Australia, there is party discipline there, but backbenchers have, generally speaking, the autonomy and agency to dissent publicly, and in some cases they either challenge party leadership outright, they cross the floor. They are another check on the government. That's I'm not saying they're still voting 97% of the time with their party, but you still get free votes more or less. In Canada, free votes are virtually non-existent. Everything is a whipped vote, and the adherence to party line is extremely strong in Canada. So I used to work at the Samara Center for Democracy. We had a report called Party Favors. Party leadership in Canada acts as an autocracy. Party leadership exacts a tremendous amount of control over the the candidate nomination process, career advancement, committee assignments, the list, the order of questions in question period. There's a tremendous amount of control over the the lived day-to-day quotidian sort of affairs of a backbencher. That being said, in a system with increasingly few options available to backbenchers to challenge or adjudicate party leadership, there is technically the Reform Act. It's incredibly constrained, which I'll get to in a moment. But if you're a backbencher in Parliament, you are essentially voting in lockstep with party leadership. With that being said, the only resource available to them is the threat of crossing the floor.
Right.
That is the last vestige of the autonomy that backbenchers are supposed to have in a Westminster system. And to me, I'm not saying that needs to be abused, or that should always be a thing. There's only been about 300 MPs in our Parliament's history that have crossed the floor. But and I brought up in the LinkedIn post, you had the example of Scott Bryson, who was part of the Federal Progressive Conservative Party when it merged with the Canadian Alliance and Stephen Harper became the leader of the modern Conservative Party. He crossed the floor to the Liberals because he disagreed with the Conservatives' position on marriage equality.
That's right.
And so, to me, that's probably the best example of floor crossing. Do I think that's a betrayal of the voter? Do I think it's worthy of a by-election? Absolutely not. And I'll explain. Does it undermine the integrity of an election? No, because elections, in my opinion, they're a point in time assessment of the composition of Parliament, and the tacit agreement that the electorate has with the House of Commons is for it to maintain confidence in itself. That's the deal for at least 4 years, technically 5, but at least 4 years. So what that means is how confidence is maintained is the prerogative of those we elect.
Right.
Whether that's through supply and confidence agreements, whether that's through coalition governments, which we've seen a couple of times in our country's history, or if it's through floor crossings. And in my view, what makes this really interesting is that this is a strong minority. This isn't like they need 17 seats to be able to form a majority.
Right.
This is just a handful. So what this means is this is effectively a majority government if they can get the job done.
Yeah.
And so this has always been part of the game. That being said, I do agree, this is my conceit, I do agree that cynicism in the electorate is a very real thing. That should be addressed. Alex Marland, who I worked with briefly at the SMAR Center, he's the country's leading expert on party discipline. He's wrote a number of books on the topic. He suggests a 30-day cooling off period where an MP sits as an independent before changing party stripe, and that allows for there to be consultation to take place and to pretty much sit with the gravity of your decision before making the call. That I think is a good idea. But do I think we should get rid of that or curtail it or to trigger a by-election? Absolutely not. This is the business of Parliament.
Interesting. No, and you make a compelling argument, and I hear where you're coming from. It's you almost make me feel sorry for politicians that they're so which is almost never happens. But I hear your point of view. If this is if as a parliamentarian, this is my only opportunity to have any leverage with my party, then I think it's important that mechanism exists. I think it's unfortunate that is in fact the case. Is what I'll say. So if I agree with your analysis, then I have to agree with your conclusion. I wish your analysis were different. But if you are in fact factual, then what else can I say? Because you need to have the opportunity for independent voice, at Queen's Park or on Parliament Hill, depending on where you're serving.
And if we want to talk about reconsidering our culture of party discipline, I think that's a perfectly legitimate discussion. I think do backbenchers need? This is partly what the Reform Act is. Only the Conservative Party utilizes the Reform Act. It allows caucus members to engage in a formal review of leadership.
That's right.
The Liberals don't have this. The NDP don't have this. So if we want to go down that path, fair. But the only reason this even comes up is because Canadians expect a strict culture of party discipline. They expect. Look. Nathaniel Erskine-Smith is considered a maverick in the Liberal Party. He votes with the party 99% of the time. And he's considered a maverick. So the other piece of this I want to share is party leadership. And this I think is worth reconsidering. Party leadership is reviewed by members of a political party. So you and me, if we're part of a party, we get to decide who the leader is. We vote on we do a leadership review, but we don't sit in caucus.
Yeah.
Right? We don't have a window.
We don't
into
know what
how-
the actual conversations are.
And I think it's important for caucus members to be able to have an outsized say in or an emphasized sort of voice in adjudicating leadership.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, that's my take.
That's a good take. I like that take. I'm glad you helped me understand that, and I'm glad we tapped into your giant poli-sci brain for a bit there too. Last couple things. We're coming up on time.
Yeah.
You'd love to wrap this up with the media that's been engaging you.
Yeah.
What's grabbed you lately?
So I struggled with this one because I just haven't really been consuming a lot.
Yeah.
I've just been busy, but I did read an article this morning that I really appreciated because I had a conversation with a friend that got a little bit heated. I'll talk about that. But so there's an article in the Toronto Star from John Loring, and it's called "This is the Real Crisis of Canadian Immigration." And John will actually be welcoming him on March 24th at our live podcast. He is one of the co-authors of.
You just spoil an announcement right there. Look
well,
at that! Spoiler alert.
A little preview, but he's a freelance journalist and writer. He frequently writes for Spacing Magazine and a few others. He wrote a piece that I was really moved with, and he argues that the federal government is they're tightening asylum rules. They're reducing the number of foreign work permits, and this is a contractionary approach to immigration. But this is insufficient because the federal government is not taking responsibility in addressing the culture war components, the dimensions of the culture war dimensions of the immigration issue, and this is actually the real crisis.
Right.
That Canadians are losing trust in what had become a cornerstone of
our entire society.
Canadian society.
Our entire
exactly.
society. Yeah.
And this has been working for a long time, and the fact that there's no real ownership of this issue and sort of counter messaging is a real lost opportunity here. And he looks at the South really, and the fact that Prime Minister Carney has rebuked the civilizational sort of rhetoric from Marco Rubio and Donald Trump, and he instead posits this civic nationalism that Canada he thinks Canada espouses, and he references diversity and all of these things. I agree with that, and but I think there's a little bit of incoherence between the rhetoric that Prime Minister Carney is communicating and the actual policy on immigration that Minister Diab is pursuing. And I mentioned I had this conversation with a friend. He's a little bit more. He believes that we should be we should do the unfortunate thing of sending folks back home, and we have to go through this, and it's unfortunate, and in another world we'd be able to house and feed all of these people, but he kind of views immigration as a humanitarian thing, and not sort of important to our economic survival. And he made a statement that kind of irked me, which is that we need to respect the process, and that we have a point system in Canada, and we need to respect that. And my response to him was, you can't respect a process that is broken. It is a broken process. We've seen the Skilled Trades Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program unilaterally eliminated. We have a mismatch between the credentials that we recruit for when we give out temporary work permits, but when it comes time to actually
permanent residence,
there's a mismatch there. Our accrediting organizations are not aligned with policy. The point system that we have so much pride about, the actual point allocations change on a dime. We do not have consistency on this file, but there are people who think that we have an ironclad system and it's worthy of respect. And in my view, there's been a real hollowing out of our immigration policy. So I appreciated this piece from John.
That's amazing. So I appreciate you sharing that. And the part that I'm trying to picture in my head is you having a fiery argument with somebody, because I think that's you're such a a calm presence. I know you have strong opinions, but you're such a calm communicator.
Oh, yeah.
Seeing you get fired up is something I'd like to see for sure. Just out of curiosity,
Yeah.
this friend of yours, without outing anybody, are they themselves a
immigrant? Yes.
recent beneficiary of the process?
Yes.
I find this fascinating.
Yeah.
Because and I'm not singling out your friend here, and you knew exactly where I was going as soon as I started asking the question. Because we're seeing it here in Brampton, in this community of newcomers, the disillusionment is not just among those who are many generational Canadian.
Yeah.
It's among our newcomer communities who are frustrated, and this undertone of, to your point, this belief in the process that is a flawed process, but this narrative of, well, I did everything the right way, and why do these other people get to skip the line, or whatever the case may be. But there's this sense of injustice among people who've been the very beneficiary of this program, and I find that part really hard to reconcile right now. But there's the pushback against immigration policy is being driven by newcomers.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm mixing metaphors, but there's definitely a pulling the ladder out from underneath you, and a sort of crab bucket sort of mentality that I see as well. And I think what a lot of folks don't understand is the rules that got you into the country and afforded you permanent residency might not work now, or might not be the case now. We see it all the time, right? When we do a site visit and an employer says, these two workers have identical profiles. They've done everything to the letter of the law. They were doctors and engineers back home, and but one is getting deported and the other is up for permanent residency. There's no logic there. I do these open mics every month, and I work with a lot of musicians who are from in particular India, and they're all unemployed or underemployed, and they're all following the law and doing everything the best that they can. They have good education, all these things. But my barber, actually, he's from Ireland. I won't say who he is, but he's an entrepreneur. He has his own barber shop, and he employs people. He's an employer. And he's like, I can't leave the country. I can't go back to Ireland because I'm waiting for my PR. And
he's afraid he won't get back into Canada if he goes home to visit his folks or whatever.
Exactly. It doesn't make any sense. Anyway.
No, I totally agree. No, thank you for sharing, and I think that's an important conversation and we will be doing more on. So like we have I think we've committed to doing some white papers and thought leadership stuff this year, and intersecting. We have a workforce one that's coming up later this year, which is really, quite frankly, an immigration paper. More than anything else. So I think we'll be learning a lot more and have a lot more to say as the year goes on. That's a good share. I like that. Mine is less intellectual, a little more emotional. In terms of media stuff. So it's like similar to you, I've had lots of trouble keeping up with anything new lately because it's just been such a busy period. But one of the things that Angel and I do every year is we make the giant list. I think it goes back probably 7-8 years if you look at the notes thing in our phone of all the Oscar movies. And we make that blitz every sort of January, February. I've tried to watch as many of the nominated films as we can as we head into award season, just so that we feel like we have a point of view, when the awards start to come out. And so we're working our way through all the Oscar nominees and so forth. And so on the weekend, we usually try to make time for at least one every weekend. And there's some amazing movies this year. But one that really surprised me, because it's not the, like the big award-winning ones. It's not the One Battle After Another. It's not The Sinners. Is we saw Hamnet. And I don't know if you've seen Hamnet yet.
No, I haven't.
So I don't want to tell too much about the story because I knew nothing about the story, and that I think is in part what made it powerful for me. But it is a historical fiction adapted from a book. It's Chloe Zhao, so amazing director, and it's a story about how one channels grief more than anything else. It comes across as it's a very straightforward biopic around the life of William Shakespeare and his wife as they meet each other. It starts off as their relationship forms and they start a family, and it's sort of the early stages of his career transitioning into becoming the playwright. But what the movie becomes then is what that family goes through during that period of his life. I can't speak to how historically accurate it is or is not. I've not done my homework, and I know there's some criticism that it's taken liberties, as all historical fiction does. But what it really does is center the period of his life when he wrote the play Hamlet, which is a variation of the term Hamnet. It's his son's name, and and what the family was going through at that time. And it's this beautiful, almost maybe connecting back to some of the conversations we were having earlier around the importance of art and in terms of storytelling, in terms of its capacity to heal. But really, I don't know how autobiographical it is even to the director, but it felt like it's a movie that's autobiographical to the director in that, art serves many purposes. It serves the ability to convey truth. It serves the ability to reflect life. But it also can serve the capacity to heal because it gives an outlet to what it is that you're going through. And that's really what this movie is about. And it's an incredibly powerful movie, which is very beautifully acted. It's a very simple story with very few characters. It's period piece, so there's not a lot, there's no CGI, there's nothing going on. It's a very simple movie, but it is so beautifully told, the story of it, and the performances, particularly of the female lead, Jessie Buckley, is absolutely incredible. And I highly recommend checking it out. It's not one of the ones that's likely to win one of the picture awards. It may win for Best Actress, but it's a story that's worth watching. It's a short film. I think it's only like an hour and a half. But I was floored at the end of it because I was not expecting to have this huge emotional response to this movie that was really about, in my mind, the movie is about the value of art. And what art can do, and it absolutely was it's worth watching. So I totally recommend it.
I will absolutely watch that. Yeah. Thank you for that.
So that's my piece there. And normally we'd wrap up here, but you did say something in your piece where you said the live podcast.
Yes.
Do you want to give a little bit of a preview?
Sure.
Episode, I think it lines up. It's episode 25.
Yeah.
We're on episode 23 right now.
Yeah.
Do you want to give a little bit of a sneak preview of what you got planned?
Sure. Yeah. So last year we did an event called Moving the Needle with Civic Action. This year, we're committed to doing the follow-up to that event, but we're taking a bit of a creative twist to it. We're doing a live podcast. This podcast that you're listening to, we're doing a live version with an audience on March 24th at 6:30 p.m. At Beehive. So transit accessible for those folks who are listening from Toronto and other places. And we are also going to be inviting the co-authors of a book called Messy Cities, which explores the informal messy urbanism of cities and the ways that in which the people who inhabit these cities create their own spaces ultimately. And I'm just really excited to have this conversation. I think Brampton is one of the messiest cities to be out there.
By the definition of the book, I'm only about halfway through it. This is a great prompt for me to get the book finished because we went to the book launch and I got about halfway through it and then got distracted by other stuff. So I picked up the book again last week. Make sure I finish it in time.
Excellent.
No, I think it's going to be really exciting. So a lot more promotion and information's coming. Did you say the exact date? I don't know if you did.
March 24th.
You did say it. So keep your ears open, keep your eyes open. We'll be doing a lot more to promote that. But we're going to have a really fun opportunity to come out. If you haven't met Vijay and I yet, it's an opportunity to meet us. But more importantly, it's an opportunity to support what I think is going to be a really fun event and meet some really cool people, because Moving the Needle last year brought out a great crowd. And I think this will do an even bigger job of that, because we're going to have some really cool people on stage with us talking about their bigger ideas and so forth as well. So
I'm really excited.
A sneak preview, spoiler alert there. But on the 24th of March, come out and listen to the podcast live.
Awesome. Cool.
Awesome. Perfect. So with that, maybe we'll wrap up here for now.
Sounds good.
Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll be back real soon.